We now get ready to begin our Seder Kriyat Torah. We take the scroll from the ark and get to hear the sacred story that is our story that Jews around the world are sharing at this time too. So would you all please turn to page 227 as we prepare to take the scroll from the ark.
Ein kamocha ve'Elohim Adonai ve'ein kama'asecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'ador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz li'amo yitein Adonai yivarech et hamo v'shalom Adonai Adonai el rachum v'chanun erech hafayim v'rav chesed ve'emet notzer chesed la'ilohofim nosei avon v'feshach ve'hata v'nakeh Adonai Adonai el rachum v'chanun erech hafayim v'rav chesed ve'emet notzer chesed la'ilohofim nosei avon v'feshach ve'hata v'nakeh Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Li'amo Yisrael B'hikdushato Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh V'nora Shemo Gadlu Adonai Hiti U'narom Shemo Yakdav Lecha 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 Adonai Hagedula v'hagivura Lecha, Lecha, Lecha Adonai Hagedula v'hagivura V'hatiferet v'hanetzach V'hanetzach v'hahod Ki kol bashamayim Bashamayim uva'aretz Lecha, Lecha, Lecha Adonai Hagedula v'hagivura Lecha, Lecha, Lecha Adonai Hagedula v'hagivura Al shlosha devarim Al shlosha devarim Al shlosha devarim Ha'olam omed Al shlosha devarim Al shlosha devarim Al shlosha devarim Ha'olam omed Al haTorah Ve'al ha'avodah Ve'al gemilut hasadim Al haTorah Ve'al ha'avodah Ve'al gemilut hasadim.
This morning on Rosh Hashana, we read from the book of Genesis. It's the story called the Akedah. It is fundamental to what the sacred story we share when we gather on Rosh Hashana. And as you may know from hearing me talk about it before, it's a tough story. Not one of my favorites. Abraham is called upon by God in the last of a series of tests of his faith. The last test, God says, go sacrifice your son. And much to my modern ears and heart, Abraham says, okay, takes Isaac off to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him. Now don't worry, the story ends up happy, that God has an angel swoop in at the last moment and tells Abraham, don't sacrifice the kid. Sacrifice something else in its place. And usually it's with my modern ears and heart that I react to the story and find discomfort and struggle with it, which is okay, because that's the point of our sacred stories too. They're not always there for us to agree with and give us an easy moral. They're there to push our buttons, to challenge us. But I approached it this year with a little different context. Don't worry, I'm not in love with the story. But the story is about, well, if I think about it in its context, in its place, it was in a harsh world. Abraham lived in a place that there was a lot of wrong, a lot of injustice and unfairness. Probably one of the most outrageous elements was that they sacrificed people. So maybe if I try to understand back then, when God asked that of Abraham, for me now I'm outraged. But for Abraham, that was part and parcel. That's what you did. But the thing in the story that was crazy, that was radical, that was subversive, that was in the midst of that awfulness, of that injustice, that lack of kindness and concern for the other human, Abraham, and maybe more so God, conspired to stop it. No matter how difficult or challenging the world was around them, they sought to make it different. They didn't say, oh, we can't change that, or everyone's doing it. They knew what was right, and that story, their story, our story, changed that status quo. And in some way, that's helpful to me. Because I think my setting, our setting now, is to look out at a world that just feels out of control, harsh, unkind. And even in the midst of that, and especially in the midst of that, when we read this story today, we are charged, we are challenged to step up and know and do the right thing. Even if it feels like we're going against the tide, even if it feels like the world is just outrageously against us. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. And that's what I'll be hearing this morning as we listen to our sacred story from Genesis. You can follow along in our Torah reading this morning. We are using our Rosh Hashana insert, and we're on page 236. Page 236. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
ויהי אחר הדברים האלה, והאלוהים נישא את אברהם, ויאמר אליו אברהם, ויאמר הנני, ויאמר קח נא את בנך, את יכדך, אשר אהבת, את יצחק, ולך לך אל ארץ המוריה, ואעלהו שם לעולה על אחד ההרים אשר אומר אליך. וישכם אברהם בבוקר, ויחבוש את חמורו, ויקח את שני נעריו איתו, ואת יצחק בנו, ויבקע עצי עולה, ויקום וילך אל המקום אשר אמר לו האלוהים. ביום השלישי וישא אברהם את עיניו ויראה את המקום מרחוק.
ויאמר אברהם אל נעריו, שבו לכם פה עם החמור, ואני והנער נלכה עד כה, ונשתחווה ונשובה עליכם. ויקח אברהם את עצי העולה, וישם על יצחק בנו, ויקח בידו את האש ואת המאכלת, וילכו שניכם יחדיו. ויאמר יצחק אל אברהם אביו, ויאמר אבי, ויאמר הנני בני. ויאמר הנה האש והעצים, ואיה הסה לעולה. ויאמר אברהם אלוהים ירא לו עשה לעולם בני. וילכו שניהם יחדיו.
ויבואו אל המקום אשר אמר לו האלוהים. ויבן שם אברהם את המזבח, ויערוך את העצים, ויעקוד את יצחק בנו, וישם אותו המזבח ממעל העצים. וישלח אברהם את ידו, ויקח את המאכלת לצחוק את בנו. ויקרא אליו מלאך אדוני מן השמיים, ויאמר אברהם אברהם, ויאמר הנני.
ויאמר אל תשלח ידך אל הנער, ואל תעש לו מאומה, כי אתה ידעתי כי ירא אלוהים אתה, ולא הסקת את בנך את יחידך ממני. ויישא אברהם את עיניו וירא, והנה העיל אחר נאחז בסבך בקרניו. וילך אברהם ויקח את העיל, ויעלהו לעולה תחת בנו. ויקרא אברהם שם המקום ההוא אדוני יראה, אשר יאמר היום בחר אדוני יראה. ויקרא מלאך אדוני אל אברהם שנית מן השמיים.
ויאמר בנשבעתי נאום אדוני כי את בנך את יחידך, כי ברך אבורך, והרבה הרבה את זרעך ככוכבי השמיים, וכחול אשר על שפת הים. וירש זרעך את צער אויביו, והתברכו וזרעך כל גויי הארץ. עקב אשר שמעת בקולי, וישב אברהם אל נעריו, ויקומו וילכו יחדיו אל באר שבע, וישב אברהם בבאר שבע.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So now that we've shared a bit of our sacred story together, it's now our custom that we turn our thoughts and our intentions towards those people whose stories are challenging at the current time, because they face the challenges of illness. And whether that illness be physical, mental, intellectual, or spiritual, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they have a fight for their lives on their hands or they're recovering from a soccer injury. Wherever those may fit, this is the time that we take them into our hearts and offer a prayer on their behalf. So I ask you now to put those people at the front of your focus. Maybe even mention their names aloud. All of them, any of them. You can know them or just know of them. We join together in offering our prayers for healing for every one of us who seeks refuah shlema, a whole and complete recovery. Our prayer for healing can be found on page 245.
Misheberach avotenu mekor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu bekor habracha liavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
We now raise our scroll, show our stories to all of us so that we all may feel connection by gazing on that same scroll and the stories we share together.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד משה. לא יישא גוי אל גוי הרם, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גוי אל גוי הרם, לא ילמדו עוד מלחמה. לא יישא גוי אל גוי הרם, goy el goy herem, lo yilmedu od milchama.
Return the scroll to the ark. We're on page 277.
Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado. Hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayerem keren liamo. Tehillah lechol hasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Et hayim hi lemachazikim ba, v'tolecha meushar, derakecha darchei nom, l'kol netivotecha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Chadesh Yameinu Kikedesh.